So here we are. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Mada, hello, ciao.
Ciao.
Let's start this International Data Luminose talk, the first international step for 2021. Protagonists are Anagram architects from New Delhi, and then they send us this promising title, Designs for the Proto-City, Disaggregation of the Future. Anagram architect, we have Mada Raman, and Vaibhav Dimri in New Delhi, established in 2001. The firm's practice is diverse and encompasses public infrastructure planning, urban design, architecture, scenography, broadcast design, furniture design, interior design installation, urban design, and great material innovation. The firm is often experimental in nature, and each project is developed like a distinct, independent framework beyond architecture. They are also Data Luminose Prize friends because they won during last edition, the 11th, the special prize L'Arca International for Coda the Pavilion for Kochi Musiris Biennale 2018, Kochi, sorry. Kerala, India, in collaboration with the curator, the art historian and critic Anita Dube. But before starting, I ask Marcella Gabbiani, President of Data Luminose, for a greeting. Ciao, Marcella.
Good afternoon and good evening.
Everybody.
Or good morning for the ones who will follow us from the States. I know that someone
all over the world.
From all over the world. So I'm very glad to say hello from the Data Luminose International Prize and Alasso Architetti to this talk that is the first one, international one, and to start our new edition of the prize, the 12th edition. Just a few words of what is going on. We are a prize that has his place to be in Vicenza. Vicenza is a little town in Italy that is famous from the architects, among the architects, because it's the city of Palladio. And we are a little town, but it's a town that has many international relations about art and Palladio and about his vocation to industry. So we think that follow this line of promoting the client and the process of building could be a line that could be interesting to create new relations throughout the world from our town to the ones who are abroad.
Also for high-level sports, I know.
Yes. Yes. And so we host this prize every 2 years in the Palladian buildings, the Teatro Olimpico, the Basilica Palladiana that you saw in the video. And what we do is to try to focus on the process who brings to an architecture of quality. And I think that today Madhav will tell about also the project that won the prize and about his clients. That was a very interesting client. And we tell stories, and the opportunity is to put together the architect, the client, the constructors, the stakeholders, the public administration, to see how architecture is built, not only by the point of view of the architect, but on the point of view that comes from outside architecture. So also the topic of today is about how architecture relates to what is going on in the world. And so I want to thank the Anagram architects for being together with us, and Giorgio, and the constructors of Vicenza that are supporting us in this talk. And so I will follow what's going on, and I will be available for later discussions.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcella. And before starting, I will say something about Mada says as I would like to speak about the various ways in which we have seen communities, architecture, and cities being displaced, disaggregated, and decentered over the past 2 decades. Then, through our work and perception, I will speculate on a proto-city being the dominant form of human settlement for the coming 2 decades. Very difficult for us, decades. Finally, I must say that I would very gladly work in a pavilion or office designed by Anagram architects, really. So, Mr. Yun, sorry, just a moment. If you have any question at the end of this presentation, you can write in DNR, like Q&A, question and answer. Thank you, Madam, Mr. Yun.
Thank you so much, Giorgio. Marcella, so kind of you to invite us over. We are very, I mean, when we came over to Vicenza to see you, that was the last time we traveled abroad. And it's a very pleasant memory. I think as far as last travels go, it's a really good memory to have. So let me start where that journey began, and I'll start my presentation. Do let me know if everything is visible just before I start. Yeah?
It's okay.
Great. So I'd like to take this opportunity to kind of look back at the past 20 years that Vaibhav and I have practiced architecture. Try and talk to you about what we've learned about architecture as we've practiced it here in India and Delhi. And try and make that the basis from which we can make projections into the next 20 years. I know it's very dangerous to make speculations, but what can I say? Architects like to live dangerously. So I would start with where this all began. So like I said, Vaibhav and I started in 2001, but we actually met in college in 1996. We became close friends, and it was on that basis of friendship that we launched this practice together. We also, the second photograph is also because we dabbled in theater when we were younger and had more time on our hands. So this is how we came together, and this has been 20 years of learning, 20 years of the joy of architecture being shared between the two of us. But these 20 years have also given us the opportunity to look at the world around us. And on that front, it appears that the world perhaps may be growing a bit apart. So just to give you a run over, in 1990, just before Vaibhav and I met, there were 174 countries if you open any atlas. In a few years, because of the Soviet Union breaking up and various other political reasons, we suddenly had about 195 flags in the UN. And just before I started this talk, I did a quick check on the number of country internet domains there are, and that goes up to 250. And these are, .it, .in, .us domains. And what it appears is that we're finding more and more ways in which we assert ourselves as nations, as domains, as territories where specific rules, specific laws apply. And architecture has also developed over these past 2 decades in a particular way. So whether it's Foster, Hadid, Ingalls, there's a kind of an aggregation of layers, certain layers onto architecture and architecture practice as we were taught it and as we were told it must be practiced. And it is that architecture is now more urban. It's also more global, extremely emphasizing a lot on high tech. And of course, you can't be talking about Bjark and not talking about the idea of being cool. So, and that too, this green cool is actually very representative of what we were told architecture is. But that basic premise of architecture being an urban form is something that doesn't have such a happy story behind it. It's not so glorious. What we've realized in the past 20 years is that to a very large extent, urbanization is not a gradual process, and it's not a process of opportunity seeking. It's actually a process of distress. And we understand urbanization in our country as a deruralization by exodus. So there are 3 types of refugees that have formed, and various combinations of this is what we see in the past 20 years, the refugee crisis have formed around, and that is ethnic refugees, climatic refugees, and livelihood refugees. That last image is, of course, a very traumatic experience very recently when under lockdown conditions, millions of people who'd moved to cities, Indian cities to work, were finding their way back to the village simply because the city could not accommodate them under Corona conditions. So here we are today, as we stand and we look at the world around us, we appear to be post-globalized, we appear to be hyper-connected, and we appear to be climate changed. I would emphasize, we can't any longer say we appear to be climate change, we are climate changed. And these three conditions, it is my proposition that these are based on three types of disaggregations or breakdowns. So one is this idea of international action or collaborative action across nations. And that has disaggregated into something we all see in our politics in our countries, and that is an emphasis on ethnic nationalism. The idea that diplomacy has moved on from being, it's more about being rude to each other than being able to create consensus and working together. And finally, and most critically, the idea of ecological nationalism, where countries feel that ecological assets that they have within their territorial boundaries are assets that belong to them. And that's most troubling. Hyperconnected doesn't mean we are talking more freely with each other. Hyperconnected actually means we live in connected silos. So whether it's gated communities or ghettos, traveling now in Corona conditions, in bio bubbles that connect to gated communities, the idea of free trade zones that have now proliferated across the world. All of us are familiar with the absolute silo that an online group can be, but also understand that that Wi-Fi hotspot in Starbucks is also privileged sort of a silo that only a few people can log into and access the internet. I don't need to talk too long on the biospheric breakdowns. I mean, we're pulling out a lot of stuff from our geosphere, from the ground. We're burning it and putting it into the atmosphere, creating a brown cloud around us that actually changes the way the weather system works, creating movements of large amounts of water from the ground to the sky and back again in cataclysmic rainfall and floodings. And of course, something that we've been now doing for a good 40 to 50 years is severe biodiversity loss. We seem to be living on this planet like we are not from this planet. So with that, let me bring you to my country, India. Many of you know it as the second, we've always had the rank of the second largest population and the largest democracy. It's a lovely country, and in the past 20 years, it's gone through some changes, and certain things still stay the same. So in 2000, we turned 1 billion strong. And being 1 billion people gave us a sense of pride because there was so much young energy in that billion. We were 16% of the world population. By 2020, we had added 30% to that. We were 135 and gone up to 17%. In the next 20 years, we're going to add another 50% to that 1 billion, and we're going to be 15% of the world's population. So there's a consistent contribution to global population that India can take credit for, even though our numbers are so large. So where are all these Indians living, right? So in 2000, we were 70% rural, 30% urban. And I'd like you to pay attention to the numbers that we are talking about. So we're talking about 30 cities in 2000 that had populations of about 300,000 or 500,000. We had 71 cities that were in 2020 that were that same number. And you can see a shift of at least 10% of our population now moving into urban situations, but they're not quite cities. They're almost cities. And hence the title, the proto-city, because it's almost a city that works and thinks like a village, but is actually operating in terms and conditions of behaving like a city. This is a satellite image of the Gangetic Plain. That's the largest agricultural area in our country, contiguous agricultural area. It stretches from Pakistan all the way to the delta at Bangladesh. And this is where a bulk of our population stays. And as you can see, it is a sort of a blur of urban settlement. There are not too many pockets that are left unoccupied. The satellite image at the bottom of the screen that you see is actually the satellite image from Delhi to the Himalayas, the closest form of pure nature that we can get to if you travel northeast from Delhi is the foothills of the Himalayas. And in that landscape, you can see these pockmarks of settlements. Now, each settlement could be a village, could be a town, but it almost has a fractalized pattern of development. So either the big city eats up the agricultural land and surrounds a village, where the village stays like a little bit of an enclave or a silo and becomes an urban slum. Or you have situations where old cities, market cities from centuries back, essentially get ring fenced, and a lot of the development that happens around it follows a city pattern. And similarly, many of our cities have these urban extensions and rural cores. The satellite closer view of my hometown, Delhi. So New York calls itself the Big Apple. I like to call Delhi the Big Cheese. And why do I call it the Big Cheese? Because about 25% of it in different pockets looks like this, which is an extremely globalized model of city making with high rises, malls, metros, so on and so forth, but distributed amongst about 80%, 85% of the city, which lives like this, which is the sprawl of almost city. These are slums, these are villages, these are occupied industrial estates that no longer produce anything. These are the nature of lands that are actually becoming cities in India. And of course, you can't talk about Delhi without talking about its biggest claim to fame of recent years. For the past 3 years, we've had the honor of being the world's most polluted city. It seems to be a competition we have going with China. But I'd like you to see this photo from 2015 in New York Times, where you can see how both the forms of city that I've talked about, the proto-city and the formal city, actually deal with this. So while the buildings that are high rises have air conditioning and sealed windows and can therefore deny the existence of this pollution, it's actually 80% of my city which has to live every day in the murk that we call our air and atmosphere. So with that, I'll start talking through a few of our projects to try and highlight what we've learned over the past 20 years about this nature of the proto-city. So first lesson was to building at the border between the proto-city and the formal city. And this happened to be our very first project, a really tiny project, 50 square meters, located at the edge of Humayunpur, where the formal, Humayunpur, by the way, is a settlement that's 700 years old. It's a village that has been eaten up by the city, and there is a border line. At that border line lies a community park, but also is the route into the village, which you can see in the thin red line. Now, it was very clear to us that that longer face that faced the community green, that seemed to be the sort of corner that was the most important corner, because on one side of it was formal, on one side of it was this urban village. This street is used by all the residents of this village to get out and about and go seek their work. So the street is actually a very busy pedestrian street. So we felt we had to respond to it, but our client was not very rich, could not spend too much money. So we felt that we needed to respond to it in a way that was architectural. And for us, the simple decision to make with brick, exposed brick, was essentially to save the money on plastering and finishing the wall. So as we were thinking about it, because we were young, we were honestly very, very excited about doing our first project, we went whole hog to design this wall in as complicated a way as we could. And while we were making these models on the computer and going to the site with all these seats, we got our first lesson that the building doesn't happen in studio, it happens by the guys making the wall. And it's actually in a collaborative process with them that we were able to come up with a very simple masonry pattern that allowed this wall to unfurl almost like a fabric. And we were able to create the logics of structure in such a way that the fabric of this wall would allow us to remove bricks in the middle and create this really almost iconic street corner. And while it doesn't really directly address the people around it, what it does is much more than what other plots were doing along the same line. So if you look at the right image, you'll see many windows have opened onto the street. But because those windows belong to people from a different economic class, none of those windows ever open. And none of them, mostly they're all covered with blinds. And I've always wondered, what is this notion of privacy that we have, where we open windows, where we have windows that make up the elevation of a building, but we don't want to open them. So this is what the wall looks like. It's a relationship to be built with the street. The staircase is the reason why that relationship gets built, because you're running parallel to the street and you can actually make eye contact. This is our next project that I'd like to talk about, because I'd also like to talk about a little bit about what we've understood about families. Families have changed in the past 20 years. India is much more based around nuclear families, families that move to cities, separate from their hometown in order to make a living. and this idea of privacy when you consider that. So our clients here were a multi-generational family, so 3 generations. They bought a plot of land right next to an very, very busy road that led to an industrial estate. So it was not very pleasant to open up. But yet they wanted to kind of create the same environment that often exists in village family homes. That is a lot of activity based around a very busy central courtyard. So this is what we tried to do. We tried to think of the space as an introverted space, a space for the family. And conceptually, we imagine the built volume as a monolith that we broke apart to create a sort of a central courtyard of activity and connections between the various family members. The idea was not to create a spectacle outside, but to be able to create an interior experience that was light, as well as something that was that allowed the family members to be excited about being in a collective space within the home rather than being in their separate bedrooms. We pulled in balconies. We were able to draw sunlight right down to the basement in the design that we had conceptualized for this. And once it was formed, it was all a conversation between this family and how they imagine their lives around this courtyard. Courtyard living is a very traditional way of living in our part of the world. And this is just a sort of a contemporary version of that. But the important thing is to understand that these windows would normally have pointed out onto the main road and never opened up. Opening up to neighbors. So there's this idea of being able to build at a place which is fresh, which is freshly urbanized, where your neighbors are also new neighbors. So this is a project that we did with our the awardee of the of Kudaram, the pavilion, Anita Dubey. This is her studio. This is what we met over. We call it Artrovert because it's part of an artist community in a part of the city that's on the very edge of the river. And this is a new extension to the city that's built over the past 10 years. And like all good planners who like to make geometrical drawings on the floor of the land, we have here an octagonal shaped settlement, which landed us up with this very odd shaped plot of land in which we had to operate. And the problem was the bigger side of the plot actually opened up to the southwest, from where we get a lot of our hottest sun in the hottest months. So we thought, what if we imagine the studio as not as a stack of floor plates, one on top of the other, but rather as an unfurling of space? What if, and this is where we had the support of Anita as well, where if we are able to share the living of the artist and the making of the art, is art formed after it has been formed, or is art in the making of the art? And if it is in the making, why is it private? Why do we imagine artist studios to be caves? Why can't they be more public? And to her credit, she did understand what we were trying to say, because a lot of times, as we evolve from village living to city living, we get notions of privacy and competition with neighbors, whereas the village form of living is much more communally interwoven, where dependencies are not merely transactional, they are perhaps even intergenerational. Where opening up your house to the outside is not considered taboo. So in fact, this wall is particularly interesting because this is where Anita intends to paint murals, so she can flip around the panels and make it a public gallery of art. She also worked with us to create, entrance situation, which could be a place of discussion rather than merely a place to leave Amazon packages. And this is actually a photo that kind of completely captures what this house means. So every Thursday evening, Anita runs a film show for her new neighbors, where she invites them to watch films every evening on the lawns of her home. So this is what we learned about how you build when your neighbors are new, when the city is new. This, of course, is
sorry, just a moment, please. Congratulations for the rhythm and the energy for your presentation. It's very, very good. Probably we have Cesare Casati, publisher and the editor of L'Arca International, that gave you the prize. I don't know if it's present, Cesare Casati. Oh, just a moment, please. Every project very different from the other in your architecture. Very, very different. So many attention to the particular, but really very different. So just a moment, just to see. You can go on. Sorry.
No,
You
no, no
can
worries.
go on.
So anyway, so I'm glad Signor Cesari is here with us because this is the project that Dedalo Luminosa advised, awarded. Good
Sorry,
afternoon.
sorry. Cesare è con noi. Buonasera, forse bisogna accendere il microfono. You have to switch on the microphone, please. Cesare, buonasera, good evening. We can't hear you. You have to switch on the microphone. I see the microphone. Oh, okay. Okay, now.
Buonasera e complimenti a tutti.
Buonasera.
Mi
You
dispiace
have something to
del
Madame?
tuo accento inglese che non è sopportabile.
Il mio?
No, il mio. Allora vi beccate
Mine too, mine too. Marcella, we help us.
Ciao Cesare.
Ah, Marcello.
Okay, I'm ready.
Madame, this is a carambata in Italia, you know the meaning of
Oh, you have to
carambata. Marcella will explain to you.
I'll try.
There's a big surprise in a television spectacle. When the TV presenter doesn't know, arrive a guest, a special guest, like Cesare Casati. This is a carambata.
My pleasure. Please.
Marcella, dico solo due parole, poi vi lascio. Volevo fare i complimenti al nostro amico Madav, che è veramente bravo. E farò prendere contatto con lui, che vedremo di pubblicare qualche suo progetto molto presto.
Marcella, will you translate?
Cesare Casati wants to compliment with Madav and will take from the LARCA contact for a publication of some works.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie, Cesare Casati.
Ciao, a presto.
See you.
Ah, comunque vi seguo. Sono qua.
Grazie.
Ciao.
It will be with us, Madame. You can go on. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy. So, Signor, this is the project that you had awarded 2 years back when I was happy to meet you while we were visiting. So, to continue, Kudaram is an interesting proposition because the Kochi Biennale is actually reviving a part of the city that was abandoned industry, about 200-year-old industrial land. So you have campuses, estates, buildings that are now being revived as art centers over the course of the Biennale. And our job was to try and develop a pavilion for performing arts on an abandoned industrial yard called Cabral Yard. And what we realized was that, 200 years of abandonment allows these yards to be covered by nature. So trees had grown where factories used to be. And because as a Biennale, you're constantly building on the same land, we thought that, here's an opportunity that we can build in a way that in a sense allows us to emphasize the nowness of the Biennale, that how you had to be at the Biennale to experience this space. So the whole space was actually designed not for construction, but for dismantling. And the vocabulary that we used was actually that of the merging of bamboo craft and steelwork. And these are two crafts that are very common in our country. But however, metalworks is considered an urban craft, whereas bamboo work is considered a rural craft. So this project brought together both these enormously talented, and I must say hugely committed, because this year there was a cataclysmic flood in Kochi and Kerala in 2018. And it is to the credit of these work people to build this together in a matter of 2 months. And I cannot express how grateful I am for the efforts that they put in. And for us to realize this sort of open performing space where auditoriums are no longer spaces of being hidden, where you need a ticket, where if you have to answer your phone, you must leave. If you want to smoke a cigarette, you cannot. If you want to eat something, you cannot. So we thought an open, half transparent, half underground pavilion that allows you to participate in various ways in performances and presentations. The next lesson we learned was when we were actually called in 2012 to build 120 toilets, community toilets in 2 cities in India. And these are brought to us the understanding of how unequal water is and how city making is actually a question of how water is distributed and sewage is collected. So the idea was for the municipal corporations of Bhubaneswar and Cuttack was to build out these on 120 sites, 12 types of toilets. And what it involved was for us a revelation of stakeholder engagement. So we had to speak with the urban affairs minister of the state. We had to convince the secretaries, the bureaucrats. We also had to have stakeholder meetings with people who would actually use it and understand what the simple act that all of us do every morning, how different it is based on where we come from and what privileges we have and what we take for granted. This project brought to fore, for example, these 4 ideas. The firstly, the importance of light and ventilation in such facilities. The second thing that we understood was very often this is the only time that the entire community gathers, once in the morning and once in the evening. So it's a social space, and therefore it has to be hygienic and pleasant. It can't be unpleasant, these community toilets. The third was basic hygiene. How do you design the interiors of a toilet that allow you to emphasize things like, say, hand washing that a lot of us take for granted, but is very much part of this idea of community space and shared hygiene. And I'm happy to report, even though it was a bureaucratic process, it took 3 or 4 years, where it should have taken a year or 2. We are now rolling out these projects in those cities, and this is an example of a completed toilet. Toilets took us to the countryside as well. The idea of building in a village is very different from the idea of building in a city, where the client is someone who is apparent, who's clear, who we understand, has a lot of power. Very often in a village, when as an architect who comes from a city, one enters the area, there is immediately a dependency built that you are coming from outside to build for us. Pakka is an experiment as a collaborative platform. It's not just us. There are many other people involved, including political leadership, who are trying to spend the local funds that they have on meaningful infrastructure. So this is a community toilet built in a very small village of an extremely disempowered community, a community of people who are actually rag pickers in the nearby city. And this toilet was meant for the women and children because they felt unsafe at traveling outside the homes for the toilets. And so I just wanted to point out that it's the same plastic that was collected from the city that was used to compress masonry blocks and then build the toilet by the community themselves. A lot of architecture is also transfer of technology and building know-how. This is a project that we are now undergoing. It's called Earth-Made Gymnasium, and I'll tell you why. It comes from a region that's about 50 kilometers outside my city of Delhi. It's an agricultural land. It's a land of strong men and women. This area has a tradition of wrestling and farming. And it's very male dominated, but now has quickly become a way for women to also participate in sports. But the unfortunate thing is only 1 in 100 or a million, 1 in 100 or 1,000 boys actually makes it big in sports. A lot of people who travel to the city to move away from the earth wrestling environment and move to mats actually get lost to the city. Very often when they don't make it big in sports, they become hired muscle for politicians or bouncers at nightclubs. And this troubled the gentleman you see at the bottom right-hand corner. He is a multi-medal winning wrestler from India, very famous in that region, Mr. Prahlad Verma, Prahlad Pahalwan, they call him. He and his village elders felt that they needed to create infrastructure that would allow mat wrestling to happen in the village. And as we worked on this project, we were able to expand the program to include a community space within this wrestling gymnasium. And we proposed to build this with rammed earth. Now that's technologies that are something that can really emphasize on this idea of building yourself and not building through contractors. So this is a proposal that is still up. We are still in the process of getting this built, but this is what we are hoping to look forward. Now, my final project before I settle down to the question and answers. We do a lot of damage to the nature, knowingly or unknowingly. This is a story of an abandoned mango orchard on the foothills of the Himalayas at the very edge of a reserve forest, which was prone to forest fires and erosions. when we were asked to build a resort over here, we wondered what it would be if instead of thinking of building buildings, we thought about allowing the forest to occupy the land that was taken away from it. So we worked on the landscape. We tried to create plans that would help us reduce the speed with which water traveled through that site, spend more time on the site to grow the plants that are required. And in a matter of 6 years that it took to develop these projects, you'll notice that these projects take a lot longer than city projects do to develop. But often you get moments of beauty where the forest completely takes over what you have built. And as an escape from the city, as a resort, it allows you to do this. It allows you to sink into the deep forest, which is actually a very primal feeling that very often now as human beings, we've given up on. So very quickly, my speculation for the future, Giorgio, building for the proto city, there are these random characteristics that we might want to discuss. One is in the proto city of the next 20 years, streets are going to be sites. Streets are where activities will happen. Streets are where commerce will happen, entertainment will happen. And therefore, as architects, we shouldn't consider streets as an externality. The second is electricity, sewage, water, generation, regeneration, all this is going to happen in a decentralized way. India is building out a massive plan of solar power. So this idea that development can scatter and doesn't necessarily need to aggregate and become along a chain. The third is plastics. Now, this is not just a plug to save the world from plastics, but genuinely materiality has to stop being so highly engineered and highly technologized, where what actually moves is just the finished product, like a plastic bottle. Instead, now I'm seeing many on various Amazon and various online marketing, you see the growing of this ceramic water. Now, this is something we as Indians know. We always drank out of ceramic bottles because through evaporative cooling, it kept the bottle cool. So this is something that I feel is big. So material change, but based on building low engineering into material. Multivocal, what we build will mean different things to different people at different points in time. And that is something that is now, because people have the ability to express themselves using a cell phone, this is something that is now going to be something architects have to get used to. Also, the idea of building is actually the idea of building reservoirs. These are not just reservoirs of resources when times are unpredictable, but these are reservoirs of knowledge. And reservoirs always require maintenance. So we need to start thinking about building, not in terms of how many hundreds of years our buildings can last, but literally, can you make a system of building that allows you to repair and rejuvenate it cyclically through community action? And that's my last point of what I think the future city is going to be like. And that's going to be a self-built city. I think we can no longer rely on governments or mega corporations to solve things like our housing problem. We have to think of ways in which we can take architecture, but not be the people who become these glorious architects who get responsibility and awards for building buildings. And instead, we are able to enable different types of people to build themselves. Building is as human an activity as eating or sleeping or drinking. We've just forgotten. All of us have just forgotten. And so with that, I hope I haven't either rushed too fast or finished.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's really okay. There's
but
just
I'm happy
one
to discuss
question.
it. Yes.
Congratulations again for your energy and for your rhythm. Marina Valente asks, how are large and small cities in India reacting to the distancing rules imposed by COVID? How are architects responding to this new need if involved?
I'll actually go back to my first slide and its earlier slide. It's actually very interesting is that, you know, what COVID has done is it's actually created containment zones. And so if I talk about the second point of connected silos and this idea of bio bubbles, COVID, you know, you need to be outdoors if you want to be COVID compliant, but there is a lot of fear of the other person transmitting the disease. So what is beginning to happen is people are either taking sides, that they're either going to say that we're going to design for the super privileged in order to help them protect themselves from the ravages of the disease, or we are going to create arguments for equality, access of equality to the city through our work. But my sense is we need to have the ability to understand this disease a little bit more. You know, I'm come from the land of Gandhi. So I think of this disease as a Gandhian disease, where when you wear a mask, it's not to protect yourself, it's to protect the other person. And that's a very strange way for human beings to have to think about life around them, or even architects. Very often we are concerned about our campus and our site and not about what impacts the building has on the city or on the environment. So it's time to think again.
Adab, in your opinion, it makes sense to speak again about shape of architecture and only about material and performing material. In your opinion.
Yeah, I think you see, we were the first generation of architects in India to start using computers in a big way. And analysis that computers allow you to do on building performance has led to the creation of performance engineering of buildings. But I keep emphasizing the word engineering because uh, actually architecture must not consider, I think, looking forward based on the experience we've had, you can't afford to look at architecture merely as something that solves problems. I think that view of architecture is a very small view of architecture. Architecture needs to actually create opportunities. And in those opportunities is very often the hope. I mean, uh, the work of Palladio, the Teatrico Olimpico, these are timeless essentially because they create opportunities. Um, and therefore comes the question of form, how we manipulate materials to create space, how we look at material and its response to light, to the idea of occupation, and to a sense of empathy with the user, if you like. Sometimes material is so engineered, so technologized that it becomes alien. It could have been built by either a Martian or Elon Musk. One can choose. And very soon we might find Elon Musk is a Martian. Uh, so, so we have to have, I think, as architects, work from a point where we truly believe that we are working for a species that is part of this planet, and we are not trying to be extraterrestrial in our visions.
Marcella, will you ask something?
Yes, because I'm receiving WhatsApp with questions to translate to Madhav. So
Okay.
we have another.
Every platform is enabled.
Yes, one was from Cesare Casati that was we were chatting, and that was very interesting to discover. In fact, as you are saying now, what is how your works deal with the technology. In fact, and so I think he means the constructing ones, and I could add also the lighter ones, the web and the new technologies. So if you want to add something about this, or...
I have a lot of salt and pepper hair like Giorgio, although Giorgio looks much more stunning than I do. But I have to say, I'm very young at heart. You have to understand, whether it's internet or science or technology, there was, when we liberalized in the early 1990s, the universe suddenly expanded when we became part of the global information system and the global technology system, building technology system. It was like, Aladdin's cave. Everything opened up and there were new things all around us. But in hindsight, we've realized that my relationship with technology is I'm a geek. I get excited by, so I mean, I spend a lot of time reading up about cryptocurrency, even though I can't afford to buy one. But I understand that technology is something that's an important human creation. We can't look at traditional systems nostalgically. It's as much a problem as the ethnic nationalism we see around us today in all our countries, where people are saying they want to revive a country that was 100 years back. They want to go back, like make America great again. I think that's going back in time. Whereas there's a continuity to technology, there's a continuity to information and knowledge systems that human beings create civilizationally that transcend time. So when I look at technology in architecture, I look at it as something that feeds itself and rolls along rather than is full of new inventions each time.
So sorry, there's a question from the chat. Ardik Arora. Sir, I see some similarity of the college zeal of combining art and architecture in your powerful presentation. It's evident how it's so difficult in India to convince the client to actually agree to our art and the task which we aim to achieve. How does one actually be like the Howard the Rourke of India? Do you understand? I don't understand. Sorry, the last.
Howard Rourke, there was a very famous novel called Fountainhead that defined the modernist architecture.
Okay.
Modernist architect. So Howard Rourke was the main character of that. But you know, I really must appreciate that comment. But you see, Howard Rourke was written as a Jesus Christ character. No one understood, and he was there to save humanity, but no one understood him. The misunderstood Messiah has always been how architects look at themselves. I have found that, especially when you work in non-urban situations, when you work for the proto-city, we have found most of our clients are as excited about the project as we are as architects. They are as aspirational in terms of wanting to create something that is very different and very new. I think a lot of this has to do with, as architects, how much we tell, how much we preach as messiahs, and how much we actually listen and pay attention to what people are saying. You'd be surprised at how radical thinking can get the further you are outside from a city, a formal city.
Madam, please, can you leave your presentation?
So sorry. Okay.
So one question, what about i maestri, like Le Corbusier, the utopical architecture, no?
Yeah.
Something remains or everything is...
No. I mean, I like to say Vaibhav and I are trained modernists. So we are taught architecture very much in the tradition of Kahn and Corbusier. But we have to understand that that vision of architecture was of the 1930s and 40s. The world was very different then. There was a certain belief in internationalism that very clearly doesn't exist anymore, because even I could argue the experiment of globalization was based on a certain assumption of internationalism. And so while there is a lot to learn about what it means for an architect to have a certain self-belief in their own understanding of how they can contribute, because neither Corbusier nor Kahn suffered from an inferiority complex, let's just say. Corbusier was perhaps one of the biggest egos architecture has seen. But I have a feeling architects can be very great. They can be very heroic. But architecture needs to be very humble, because what architecture does is impacts life for much longer than the person lives the architect's life, by many decades. And that to me means a lot more responsibility than saying that this is how the modern city will be and this is how we will do it. So while Corbusier, Foster, Hadid, Ingalls are exciting people, and I think I can see why their visions find a lot of support. I don't know how many of us will have the good fortune to have access to those buildings.
There's another question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, sorry, please.
Okay. Allegra Pitera, what advice do you have for architecture students as they move forward in this evolving architectural context?
I have always felt when we started architecture, so my parents, I grew up in Delhi, but my father was in the Navy, he retired, he went to a southern city. Vaibhav's parents were on one end of the city. So we just came together in Delhi for our college. And when we finished, we were wondering, where do we go and start work? And it was natural for us to say in Delhi. I think architecture suffers from this misconception that it is an urban work, it is an urban job. I think all of us have a lot of potential of impacting the immediate 10 square kilometers of settlement that we occupy. We call our town, our hometown, our neighborhood, our village. We don't need to become heroic architects like Corbusier in the big city. And not all architects need to build new cities within the 40 odd years that they practice. A lot of this is stuff we tell ourselves. Howard Rock and the Fountainhead have created an image of the architect.
I talked about utopia also.
Yeah, even though the world around us has changed. So I think to that question, I would say, look around you, and I think you'll find tremendous opportunity to offer your services, your intelligence, your expertise in ways that you can actually see the result right next to you. You don't have to travel to a big city away from you to do that.
Marcella, would you ask something?
I have another question from the WhatsApp.
Okay.
So how do you work on the edge of the cities? Because we saw the composition, I think, of the big cities. The question is about the edge of the cities. How do you work about their renaturalization?
Renaturalization. Yeah, that's actually the 7 projects are all
About
borderline projects. You know, when territories get formed, borders get made, walls get built. You know, you create confrontation, and building at the edge is political. It's a political act. Building at the edge is about negotiating, just like a diplomat would. I think very often as architects, we externalize what is outside our site. We say it doesn't exist, it's not important. We are only in charge of what we do on our sites. So the first step of building on the edge is to understand that it's not necessary that the person who's hired you is the only stakeholder and has to have the biggest say in the matter. Being able to operate on the edge of human society between communities is much more about being able to talk and being able to be heard and being able to have conversations. But on the edge of nature, you have to understand that, you know, 4,000, 5,000 years back, when human beings started growing things agriculturally and started settling down, which is the time in which architecture or buildings became the size that we see that they are. We have to understand that that moment humanity went through a point where it said that I'm now going to be a little more greedy than every other species on this planet, of plant and animal life. So when you work with nature, you have to kind of have the same kind of guilt that, say, colonial countries have about their ex-colonies today. You know, what we see as a refugee crisis is almost like ex-colonies saying, hey, you know, this is payback. So you have to understand that human beings have colonized our planet. And which is why, you know, great minds like Elon Musk, who promised to colonize Mars, actually makes me wonder whether we have, you know, whether we've kind of lost our minds a little bit, because how can you imagine yourself outside this planet? So I will just say that working on the border with nature is the most humbling thing that you can do. And as climate change creates much more majestic forms of destruction, I think architects, engineers, builders, people who pay for all this have to be much, much more humble in how we operate in these spaces.
So the last questions, I don't know if you answered before. Anonymous asks, what will be the role of the architect in the proto-city? Just to close.
Yeah, so an architect is a mediator. An architect will be a storyteller, especially stories that are not the dominant story, the subaltern stories, because that's where we will.
Winner story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we will go to hunt for new clientele. I'm a strong believer in trying to expand the market of my services. And I think as architects, if we are entrepreneurial, it is to be able to provide our services to as many different types of people at different scales as possible. It's selfish, really, because it's through that we learn and grow as architects. So that's the only. So I think that's what I'd like to say to that question.
So we are at the end now. Marcella, you want to say
if I found this very interesting. I think the whole conversation is about how to be strong, being gentle,
Yeah,
because it's all about this kind
Gandhi lesson.
sorry,
Lesson of Gandhi, Mahatma.
Yeah.
and how to listen to what's around you, and that I think it's very important. I think in the whole world is very important. Is for different reasons. In Europe, in Italy, we have different issues, but I think that this kind of new way to be an architect is could be very useful, and also the combination you talked about the technology and what's around in the place where you are could be very important. We have a great heritage here that needs this gentle approach. And we have little towns that are abandoned that needs this. And we have very different problems, but different issues. But I think that was very, very interesting and opening minds about many thoughts on this way of approaching to architecture. So I just thank you and Giorgio and everybody who followed us, and we will have another talk in a month, more or less, with Alfonso Femia and Atelier Alfonso Femia, and we will have another topic. I hope to have you.
Perhaps we will talk about school, the role of the school.
Young people.
Yeah. Madam, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you.
switch off, please, the camera and the microphone. See you next time.
Thank you again.
Ciao, madam.
Bye.